Good afternoon and welcome back to another ironic introduction to another video. Today I'm finally giving my impressions on the Falcon and Gambit buffs coming soon. I'm not going to do like a full breakdown because at this point a lot of people already have. I'm just going to throw out my thoughts, kind of comments on some of the things I was really happy to see, and kind of put question marks on situations or parts of the buffs that I'm like questioning or maybe would even want a little bit more, although, you know, we're probably not going to see more than that. But I'll start with Falcon. And Falcon, what I really like is they highlighted probably his strongest utility even before being buff, and that's the recon scan. As is, like pre-buff, he had access to 100% defensive ability accuracy reduction, which was great. It's just that his damage was so incredibly low that it was completely overshadowed by the unusability of his damage output. So they've added a lot of really cool things. The first, which is something I mentioned when I was like predicting my Falcon buffs, was they reduced the duration of time it takes to trigger the scan from 2 seconds to 1.2. And if you've ever dashed back and triggered like Namor's special activation and then you've dashed back and triggered Falcon's right now, it's a really long time to dash back and hold block. Even 1.2 seconds is a pretty sizable period of time to have to dash back and hold block. There's a high chance you're going to take some blocked hits, but at least now you're not going to take a heavy to the face as you dash back, hold block, and then the opponent dashes in and then immediately heavies and you're just sad. So I do really like that. 14 seconds is a okay amount of time. This is the same as Annihilus' Special 2, I believe. It's a sizable period of time, and it is something you can retrigger. It only has an 8-second cooldown. I say only, but this is my first question mark. 8 seconds is a really long cooldown period for someone who's like, this is their biggest part of their kit. And considering we have champions who have access to ability accuracy reduction with significantly less constrictions on it, such as Black Widow, or Blade when you're running synergies, Archangel with his neurotoxins. This is a pretty sizable period of time to lose your 100% ability accuracy reduction. And in a lot of situations, if you're using Falcon for that AAR, it's kind of a big deal. That's 8 seconds that if you're fighting versus Magic and you're trying to not proc Limbo, that you just kind of gotta wait and dance around. It's not the end of the world, but I do think it would have been better at 5 or 6 seconds. It would have felt a lot more usable, and I can already predict that when you use Falcon, you're gonna need to time the triggering of your recon to get the maximum value out of it, and then dance for 8 seconds. And dancing for 8 seconds is a lot harder than it sounds, particularly if you're going up against a stun immune champion. So that's my first question mark. It's still really good. 100% is really nice. It's one of those securities, and if you're fighting against a science champion, say using Falcon for Thing, you do have plus 40% duration. That's essentially 19.6 seconds, I believe. Pretty good amount of time. Like if this was a 20-second and 8-second cooldown, I wouldn't have an issue with the 8-second cooldown. So as long as you're using him for science, it's going to feel very substantial. And they've added this Falcon's basic attacks gain 3,152 attack. I would have liked if this applied to just like a theory, just Falcon gains plus 3,152 attack, but just on his basic attacks, this is going to have a pretty significant difference on how hard he hits, and that's really nice. In addition to that, he has this on evade, which is cool because it, like, based on the way it's said, and even with the dev notes, it's very clear that even when the evade fails to trigger, you get this benefit. My question is whether or not you're going to get both. I'm not entirely sure by the way it's reading, because it's whenever a opponent triggers a passive evade, not necessarily actually evades, because like the evade, well, based on the way it says, they're saying it fails to trigger. So I would be under the assumption you don't get it. But personally, just like the way I think ability stacking works, you should get both. Just that's a whole semantic thing for another time. But this is going to scale your critical damage rating with Falcon, so you're going to see some bigger yellow numbers in longer fights, as long as you're playing around that 14 on, 8 seconds off window versus evade champions. So that's really nice. 134 critical damage rating isn't the most amount, but if you're going up against someone, say like Nightcrawler, or you're on a Mixmaster node, where you know you're triggering evade, 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 Falcon's going to look really, really good on damage numbers. And then additionally, they've got his special attacks applying additional benefits, like guaranteed bleeds on special 1, double the bleed if you have locked on active. On a special 2, you're getting extra critical damage with a 100% chance to crit on the second hit, which is going to be huge because the opponents will have reduced physical resistance. And then on his special 3, you've got Incinerate, as well as a vulnerability that you'll be attaching to the opponent. The only thing I really would comment here is I would have loved if this was a weakness debuff. And I know that's weird just because vulnerability as a buff is better than weakness, but I think it would have been nice to have Man Falcon enter as another champion who can apply weaknesses, even if it's on a special 3. Like a 25-second weakness would be really, really nice to have for Alliance Quest, and it would help especially with like Spider-Gwen, who is on the path and is an evade champion. And yes, you would have to build to a special 3, but that would be like a really neat option and an entryway for like endgame users to see Falcon as a solid utility champion. But even the vulnerability buff is nice for damage, although I imagine most players will rotate either special 1 for the bleed or special 2 for the big crit hit at the end. My prediction is that the numbers are going to be probably decent, pretty good. I don't foresee anything like crazy big here on the damage numbers, and his SIG ability isn't necessary, but it's definitely going to feel really, really nice for that on window, off window that I was referring to. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty good buff for Falcon. Personally, I'll probably rank 4 mine sometime in the future, maybe even rank 5 just for giggles. I have a soft spot for the champion. He's always on my left. But overall, I'd say pretty good. And that's really all it needs to be. I feel like there's suddenly a utility here that's really, really nice to have. I think players who pull Falcon in the future won't be as upset about it. They'll see, some utility here to eventually get. But I don't see anything in this kit that makes me go, wow, this champion's going to break the meta. But he'll definitely be worth pulling. Next up, I have Gambit, and they've done some really cool things to Gambit, which I think are interesting. They didn't really affect the speed at which you generate kinetic charges. Like, it's still 0.4, but what they've done is they reduce the penalty as you charge extra, which is really nice because that first one you gain really quickly. Like, it was really, really nice. What made Gambit so frustrating was after you got to like 4 or 5, you could never generate extras because it just took so dang long. So I really, really like that change. That's a nice solid change to make it feel more impactful and plausible to charge up extra prowess charges. Additionally, they changed it so that you don't have to hit them with the heavy attack, you just have to charge it, similar to Captain America Infinity War's heavy with his kinetic potentials. So I think that was a really, really good change. That didn't even occur to me. I don't think I even mentioned that. So I think this is a really, really good change. This is going to allow you to chain into a special. So I'm all for that. And this prowess percentage is a lot higher than the current one. And 16 seconds is a pretty good amount of time for prowess, especially considering Gambit is going to be heavily centric on stun chaining. So if you're going to be stun chaining anyway, 16 seconds feels a lot more significant. Additionally, each stun on the opponent will reduce regeneration rate and combat power rate by 40%. Now, this is a big deal. Combat power rate reduction is huge here because if you're stacking multiple stuns on the opponent, or honestly even just one stun on the opponent, you're going to be able to hit into them for a lot longer before you have to back off and bait specials. This means that if you play Gambit properly, you're going to be able to throw your special, put them in a stun, hit them a whole bunch of times, and not have to worry about pushing them into a special 3 for as long. It will still inevitably happen, but it's going to give you a lot more time to just pummel, and that's really, really, really neat. They've also given him anti-thorns, medium, heavy, special 1, and special 2 attacks all have anti-thorns. They even mentioned this is the same exact implementation as Omega Red. I think it's a little different, but it will work theoretically the same, so that's sufficient. They've also given him something called Flak Jacket, which will essentially give him a pseudo shield that provides armor rating, incoming bleed potency reduction, as well as against non-contact physical attacks. It will provide additional armor and critical resistance. This is cool because if you're using him as an attacker and you're playing properly, he's essentially bleed immune, bleed resistant completely, which is really nice, and he'll be a little bit tankier, at least for a little bit part of the fight. But if you're someone facing off against Gambit, he will eventually become you know, bleed vulnerable, and he'll stop being as tanky. It'll just kind of hurt in the beginning. So I wouldn't be surprised, just from like a defender perspective, if we see Gambit on Do You Bleed, or maybe even a Do You Bleed boss in the future. Like, if I had to predict, I think this would be a really good implementation, and they might even do something where they put like a node on there. Sorry if I'm giving Kabam's ideas. Where they put like a node on there where it's like Flak Jacket resets every 20 seconds. So then you have to pummel Gambit, and then you get like a 10-second window of like 300% increased bleed vulnerability or something. And then that's the opponent, that's the boss. I think that would be pretty neat depending on how they manage the nodes, etc. But yeah, that's just something. If that happens, I'll get to say, ha, I told you all it would come. All of his special attacks, if the opponent does not have an armor up buff, will give him 20% ability accuracy. This means essentially that if the opponent does not have an armor up, so you don't want to bring him versus champions who have armor ups, which is pretty convenient because a lot of times that's tech champions, so just don't bring him versus a lot of tech champions. All of his specials will have over 100% chance to trigger. Otherwise, that's only 85%, so essentially, you know, play this properly. The special 1 will have a 2.5-second stun. The special 2 provides a 85% concussion, and it says its potency of the effect is affected by class relationships. I'm assuming this is probably like Agent Venom's, where it's plus 15%. So my guess is that if you bring Gambit versus a skill champion, you're going to have a 100% concussion debuff. Whereas if you bring him versus a tech, it's only going to be 70%. That would be my guess, but it might be plus or 15% from 70. I'm not entirely sure because they haven't given us specifications there. And then the special 3 will apply 2 5-second stuns. And this is huge because when that's comboed with his combat power rate reduction, this will be 80% combat power rate reduction. Now, one of the things I am curious about is whether or not this opponent reduces regeneration rate will go negative with Despair, and whether or not Gambit might be a potential blast champion for blasting people down with regeneration. Now, it's not going to be consistent like it is with Cap, Torch, or Void, but it would be a neat option for maybe a boss rush or an aggression regeneration node sometime in the future. Just something I thought would be worth mentioning. But I imagine people will go special 3 and then spam special 1, and then they'll use the special 2 for concussions if they need. But I imagine he'll be a special 3, special 1 champion, where you bait your special from the opponent, drop the L3, and then pummel into them, dropping L1, 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 L1 with the 16-second prowesses for big damage. And I do think this is going to be really, really good. Gambit's damage is already like mildly decent at the moment, so this big change in prowess, this increase in damage and crit, the guaranteed stuns, I think it's all going to be really, really good. He's going to be very, very powerful against non-stun immune champions, as long as the opponent can be stunned. So I think this is also a really good one. I think between the two, Falcon probably has more overall utility, but I think Gambit's going to be a little more flashy and a little more prevalent in the immediate power, just like when you're looking at video reviews when they finally come out. That's my thoughts. Sorry it was a little long-winded, but I finally got around to it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if I missed something or there's some piece of information I haven't seen here. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.